Hello, Cathy. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say today.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for everybody. And I think the reason we're going to record it is just to get it out there. That's the important thing. So Juliana, you tell me you want me to jump in.
You can start whenever you would like. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start right away then. Thank you very much to Vanderhoof Businesses for inviting me. My husband and I run a small business. We design and build houses, custom homes for the past 38 years in the Lower Mainland. We understand the importance and challenges of running a small business. As business people, the issue of human sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, and child sex trafficking is an important crime to understand because it can impact your business. I'm going to jump right in. What can businesses do? Make it difficult for sex traffickers and sex buyers to use their properties, products, and services. Raise awareness about the issue internally and externally with partners, consumers, customers, and stakeholders in ways specific to your industries. Number one, learn the indicators of human trafficking. Number two, know the numbers to call for help and advice. Number three, make sure your workplace is trauma informed. The most important question to ask anyone that you think is in difficulty is not what is wrong with you, but what happened to you. Provide jobs, internships, skills training for youth to keep them out of the sex industry, and provide these opportunities for survivors to help them get their lives back on track. Role model to men and boys the importance of not exploiting women and girls, emphasizing the importance of respect, integrity, and healthy relationships, while upholding the principles of gender equality and human rights in all business interactions. Please note, the travel and hospitality industries are particularly vulnerable to this crime. Have a code of conduct in your business for your employees, staff, and partners. Take action in the community. Be part of an awareness program. Collaborate with NGOs and those on the front line, and I'm presenting to the frontline service providers next week in Vanderhoof. Work with law enforcement. Keep them in the loop of any suspicious activity. Encourage them to get additional training on human trafficking. For example, I just presented to the first RCMP across Canada webinar series on human trafficking that was available for every officer and police agency in the country. That is something that local officers can sign up for and request. So now let me explain my work and the crime of human trafficking. And I should start by, I love to show my medal. I got a Queen's Platinum Jubilee medal for my work, and what a huge honor. I mean, she just passed away, so this medal means a great deal to me. And I Googled just to see how many medals have been given out, and not an awful lot. So that was a huge honor. I started the Be Amazing campaign just last year. So it's Be Amazing, Stop Sexual Exploitation. And I've got a website. Here's my website. It's a teaching website, beamazingcampaign.org. It has downloadable handouts, and it's got 2 videos in the resource section, one for parents and one for youth. And the videos were videotaped by the Richmond RCMP. Human sex trafficking and sexual exploitation for the purpose of prostitution is the fastest growing crime in the world, in Canada, and very much here in BC. What is human trafficking? It is recruiting, transporting, transferring, receiving, holding, concealing, harboring, or exercising control over a person for the purpose of exploiting them. The key word is exploitation. So my goal is to raise awareness about this crime in order to stop it. My focus is child sex trafficking, because it is youth and children who are being aggressively targeted, exploited, and harmed by the sex industry. And I like to watch the news, and CBC just published this national sexual assault rate, the highest since 1996. That's Stats Canada. So our numbers are really, really going up in terms of sex crimes. That's concerning. So what are the ages? The average age to get into the sex industry is 13 to 14 years of age, we say, across the country. But it is much younger for Indigenous girls. And in the Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island, the target age now is 10, 11, and 12 years old. We're talking tweens, we're talking grade 4. But again, Indigenous is even younger. 54% in the sex trade are Indigenous, 70 to 90% in urban centers. And I would include Prince George in that number. They are severely overrepresented in the sex industry. 82% involved in prostitution had childhood sexual abuse or incest. 72% live with complex PTSD. Now, here's a number people don't know. 95% in prostitution want out. It is not a choice. It is not a job. It is not work. 86% have housing needs. 82% need drug rehab. That needs to go together. 84% to 90% of prostituted persons are pimped or trafficked. So organized crime and international crime syndicates are typically involved. Crime simply follows the money, and traffickers make hundreds of thousands of dollars per victim per year. I've heard the number. I mean, it's just astronomical. One girl can make a trafficker $900,000 a year. I work with VPD, and they give me, I mean, the numbers are just huge. There's a lot of money involved in this crime. So I've been raising awareness about human sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, and child sex trafficking for over 45 years, but now full-time for the last 9 years to every city council, regional district, MLA, MP, and police agency in BC since the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act, we call it PSEPA, became federal law in 2014. So the police would enforce it, the public would understand it, and be able to report it. So the law has 4 parts. Number 1, it targets the demand by targeting the buyer of sex. The trafficker, facilitator, John, buyer of sex are criminalized in Canada. Number 2, recognizes the seller of sex as a victim, usually female, and is immune from prosecution. Number 3, exit strategies are supposed to be in place to help the victim out of the sex trade. And number 4, there's also supposed to be a robust prevention education program, so youth, children, and the vulnerable are not pulled into the sex industry. So this law focuses on the source of harm, the buyers of sex and the profiteers. The clear statement from Parliament was that girls and women in Canada are not for sale. They are full human beings with dignity and human rights. And there's my big poster right behind me. This law is not enforced in British Columbia. Vancouver and Toronto are global sex tourism hotspots. And this is shocking. Canada is a child sex tourism destination. Where did I get that from? I got that from the Trafficking in Persons report, actually 2021, from the US State Department. And also this book, and I've been interviewed with this man. It's called Sex Industry Slavery, Protecting Canada's Youth by Dr. Robert Christmas. He's from Winnipeg, Manitoba. He's a Winnipeg police officer. He's got all those stats I mentioned in his book. So the global sex trade is growing really fast, and there's no check to stop it at this point. And it's targeting our children because children is where the money is, and it's fueled by the internet where most of the luring is taking place. So contributing factors to this are globalization, unregulated technology, no surprise, very limited law enforcement, and very little prevention education. And that's the piece that I do. Canada does have a new national human trafficking hotline number, and I encourage everybody to memorize this number. It's 1-833-900-1010. And you can get help 200 different languages. You can get help 24/7 in any corner of Canada. In BC, we do have BC's Office to Combat Trafficking in Persons, but I find nobody's heard of it. So I've used them and they are excellent. So they run something called Victim Link. So that's what we have provincially. But again, there's just not been much advertising for that. Pornography is fueling the sex industry and creating the market for commercially paid sex. Men and boys statistically are the buyers of sex and are the key to end exploitation. So what can be done to stop this crime? I suggest this strategy to civic and municipal governments. You need to reduce the demand and diminish the supply. You reduce the demand by education and targeting complicit businesses. You diminish the supply by education and public awareness. So what are the businesses most involved? Number one is unregistered massage and body rub parlors. Not giving licenses to those would cut human trafficking drastically. Nail spas, day spas, modeling agencies, tattoo parlors, escort services, cheap bars and hotels, men's clubs, Airbnb has got a big problem, VRBO, casinos, strip clubs, organized crime clubhouses, bus stops, homeless camps, tent cities, work camps, modeling agencies, pool halls, community centers, malls, anywhere that youth congregate can all be typical covers for sexual exploitation. Crime clubhouses can be removed by land use bylaws. This was done successfully in Manitoba. In Ontario, every motel and hotel guest has to be registered who's physically in the room. So the sex industry is targeting our youth, children, and the vulnerable in every BC community. And schools are the recruiting grounds for gangs and sex trafficking. A critical deterrent is a school liaison officer program. The officers prevent crime and protect the vulnerable. Please let your local school board, and we've got elections this week, let your local school board know that these officers are very important to have in the schools. BC is so far behind every province in Canada by not enforcing the federal law, and there's no provincial prevention awareness campaign. Ontario, Manitoba, and Alberta, for example, are best practices by enforcing the law and prevention education. So Alberta's just, what are they giving? $20 million in funding to fight human trafficking. We don't have anything like that here in BC. I think a few $100,000 are given to fight. And Ontario, same thing, hundreds of millions of dollars to stop it. So in contrast, BC is more like Washington State, Oregon, and California. I call it the West Coast phenomenon. This needs to change, and business leaders can lead the charge and raise the issue for public awareness. So we have a brand new center, Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking. They've just released their first report on trends in human trafficking across Canada. The biggest problem, Canadians are not even aware of this crime, don't believe it happens in Canada, and do not know the indicators of human trafficking. The report found the people most likely to report the crime and help victims are family members. At the same time, it can also be family members who traffic and sexually exploit their children. The Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking runs the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. They offer these free posters. You can contact them and get these, and they can be put up in your businesses or in your area. Sex trafficking is for the purpose of prostitution. It's really important to understand the link. The vast majority of prostituted persons are trafficked. Prostitution relies on underage trafficking and recruitment. So who is targeted? This is a gendered issue. The sex buyers are male. The victims are typically female. The majority of cases in Canada of trafficked victims are under 25 years of age. The most vulnerable are the Indigenous, new migrants, LGBTQ, disabled, youth at risk, youth in care, any girl under 14 and some boys. Traffickers look for one thing: vulnerability. How is trafficking done? The traffickers are typically between 17 and 34 years of age. They meet the demand for commercially paid sex because it's so lucrative. There would be no trafficking if there was not a demand. No buyers means no business. The majority of traffickers are male, but a growing number of traffickers are female, especially in schools where there is now peer-on-peer recruiting. Traffickers are organized, sophisticated, and often involved with organized crime. Recruiting is done primarily online. Traffickers use these social media platforms like Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, video games, and chat rooms to recruit. Boyfriending and love bombing is the tactic. They promise expensive gifts, presents, trips, and anything that parents will not give. Who are the buyers? Typically, they are over 50 years of age. They are professionals with university degrees, make $100,000 a year, are married with families. However, with the normalization of pornography viewing, younger men are now buying sex. So what's the result and outcome? The sex industry is a deadly and brutal industry. Victims end up drug addicted, mentally ill, committing suicide, or are murdered. Very few get out. We say about 5% get out. The cost to rehabilitate survivors is about $60,000 per year. It's probably way more than that now, for at least 8 years. And that's if they can get anybody that can help them with trauma counseling. They never get over the trauma because of the complex PTSD. The sex industry is not empowering for any woman. Please think serial killer Robert Pickton. Robert Pickton was the pig farmer from Port Coquitlam who dismembered prostituted women, particularly Indigenous women. I do not want the public to be under the illusion as to the brutality of the industry. Legalizing and normalizing the sex industry increases the size and scope of the trade, leading to more human trafficking, child sex trafficking, involvement in organized crime, international crime syndicates, more prostitution, and more violence. This is what has happened in Germany, the Netherlands, Nevada, and New Zealand. I want to include Thailand. Actually, prostitution there is illegal, but it is not enforced. In Germany, the sex industry is normalized. 80% of men buy sex, and that's huge. In Canada, it's about 10 to 12% of men buy sex. What would happen if Canada fully decriminalized the sex industry and we went from 12% of men buying sex to 80% of men buying sex? Where does the supply come from? Youth, children, the vulnerable, and the marginalized. The Indigenous would be first casualties since they are already severely overrepresented in the sex industry. There are simply not enough women and girls in Canada who want to sell their bodies. So in the long term, we would have to import girls from the poorer countries. And this is what Germany, Netherlands, Nevada, and New Zealand have resorted to. Canada shares the longest border in the world with the USA. Canada would become America's brothel. So here's a recent case. I was interviewed by the Global News in Manitoba regarding the case of R versus Alcorn. This was a particularly disturbing case because it involved an underage Indigenous girl who was sexually exploited, filmed, and then she committed suicide. The perpetrator was charged and appealed for a lighter sentence. Instead, the justices quadrupled the sentence, setting a court precedence for the whole country. So how do we stop trafficking? The 2 E's. We need enforcement of the law, and we need education. To the 3 P's, to police, politicians, and to the public. At this point, trafficking is now an out of control global problem. We are losing in a very big way until we address the demand for commercially paid sex. In other words, we've got to convince men and boys to stop buying. Otherwise, trafficking will continue to skyrocket. Traffickers will not be stopped because there's too much money involved. So what are the signs? The girl becomes secretive, and this might be a girl that you know, one of your relatives, a niece, a daughter, the girl next door. She becomes secretive. There's an older boyfriend that you may or may not meet. She's got new clothes, and they might be fairly provocative looking. She's wearing jewelry. Gold chains now are popular. There is a change in dress, frequent sleepovers at a friend's house. There's a change in attitude towards school and friends and family. The grades start to drop. The girl is exhausted. There's 2 cell phones. There's cuts and bruises, tattoos of crown, diamonds, initials, and strangulation marks on the neck. That is a theme in pornography. What can you do? Learn, share, alert. Learn about the issue. You can go to my website. Go to Joy Smith's website at the Joy Smith Foundation. Joy Smith, the former MP from Manitoba, introduced our 3 human trafficking laws and has just launched the National Human Trafficking Education Center. And so I've mentioned that here on the second part. Then go to the Canadian Center to End Human Trafficking. I've already mentioned that. And lastly is, and I've mentioned it at the top here, is the Canadian Center for Protection of Children out of Manitoba. They run cybertip.ca. And just so you know the work that they do, they're a fantastic globally. They just do really great work. But here's their latest report, online child sexual victimization, picking up the pieces. I don't want anybody having to pick up pieces, but that's where we're at with this issue. Share what you've learned today with your family and friends. Alert politicians and law enforcement that this is an issue. This is very simple to do and very effective. The federal government is currently reviewing the PSEPA law, the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act. The sex industry is trying to repeal that law in order to normalize, legitimize, and institutionalize the sex industry in all of Canada. So there's currently a court case in, here I've got 2 articles on it, in Ontario, with the sex industry trying to ask for repeal of that law in order to fully decriminalize prostitution in the country. So more detail now on what businesses can do. On a positive note, businesses can hire, mentor, and train youth to work. Learning and taking responsibility is a significant step into the adult world and will help youth develop into resilient, contributing, healthy citizens in a community. Every young person is one caring, consistent adult away from success. Business experience and training is invaluable for learning life skills. Every business needs reliable, contributing workers for the long term. Investing in youth benefits everyone, the youth, the business, the community. So here's a suggestion. Put on a career fair with all businesses represented so that youth can start to think about and plan for their future. Put this on in the high school or a local mall. Actively recruit youth to your business. Inspire youth to learn about the business and the work world. Otherwise, the alternative may be gang life or criminal activity, and communities must stop this rapidly growing trend. On the negative side, we've got, so here's our two experts. We've got Joy Smith, who's the expert in Canada, but Valiant Ritchie is the expert globally. So he works for the OSCE, the Organization for the Security and Cooperation of Europe, 57 countries, including Canada. And he points out that businesses need to train their employees that buying sex and viewing pornography cannot happen on company time or on company computers. Setting up dates in order to buy sex occurs at 2 p.m. online, and it's typically done on company time before the men head home from work. While this may not be a problem in Vanderhoof, it is a big problem in larger centers. The big problem in Canadian cities right now is a significant spike in crime. Just look at Vancouver and Surrey as examples. Their downtown cores are not working because of homelessness, drug use, prostitution, out of control gang growth, tent cities spreading. On the radio, businesses in the downtown core of Vancouver, for example, report that they've had it. They're pulling out because they've been broken into so often. Stabbings occur in their business, in front of their businesses, et cetera, et cetera. It's become impossible for these businesses to operate. Here's the principle. Safe communities is good for business. I'll say it again. Safe communities is good for business. Public safety is the job of provincial and municipal mandates, policies, and funding. Otherwise, law enforcement can't do much. They have their hands tied, and they tell me that all the time. I have two asks for your chamber. Number one, would you recommend me to other chambers of commerce to present? Could I present to your provincial group, to your national group? I understand the Canadian Chamber of Commerce is actually meeting this week, and I've heard that the CEO, Aaron Beattie, is doing a very good job. Number two, would you write a letter or email for me to the Solicitor General, Mike Farnworth, he knows the work I do, and to the Minister of Justice, David Lametti? I can send a short, simple template if you are interested. So maybe we could end the videotaping now, Juliana, and we can go for questions. I hope Juliana's there. I think we can stop the recording. Does anybody know if Juliana is there? Can
Yeah,
she
she
may
may
have had
have somebody come in. I'll stop recording it now.